I paid the bills because every man in that tent had decided she wasn't worth a half. The auctioneer had almost let her go without selling her at all. The trader's men had turned her over to the rope and dragged her 2 steps at a time across the dust. Then I stepped forward with 2 folded dollars between my fingers, and every man in the tent started laughing before the sound had time to die down. $2, I said. The auctioneer didn't even try to hide his grin. Now that's a fellow who likes a bargain, he said. The Apache woman at the end of the trading company's rope didn't lift her head. That is how she came home with me. But first, settle in wherever you are tonight. Some of you are at the kitchen table with a cup of something going cold. Some of you are on the porch in the last of the light. We love knowing who's with us. Tell us in the comments where you're listening from tonight. We're glad you're here. The crowd at the trader's auction in Gila Flats had come for cattle and any other wares the company had collected in its latest raids into the southern desert. They started out with a crate of saddles, then a half-broken stallion nobody wanted, then 3 mescalero taken in the latest brush-up with the cavalry. There were ropes around the wrists. I noticed her because she didn't look away. The 2 men had their heads lowered, the way horses do when they've been whipped down. She did not. Her eyes followed each bidder like she was deciding for herself what each face was worth to her. Her face was long, her cheekbones sharp. Her hands were dirty. She was maybe 22, and there was a thin white scar across her right cheek that curved like a crescent moon. Her hair had been cut short by a knife. She had the look of a woman who had been starved soft and beaten hard, and was not yet either. Harlan Bexley was at the front of the tent with a cigar between his lips. He was the wealthiest man in Gila Flats. He owned the cheapest cattle, fed at the cheapest water, but he had bought up the cheapest water, and that was the only thing that made him rich. He bid first on one of the mescalero men, 50 cents, the way you would bid on a pig. Trade in another transaction. The Indian was sold. For her they called out 0. Nobody raised his hand. There was a tongue in the gallery. That's a heavy one for the price of a calf, somebody said, and laughed. One of the trader's men pulled the rope that bound her wrist. She was dragged a step forward. He caught my eye. He had the look of a man who expected me to laugh with him. I didn't. I walked up to the front of the tent. I took out 2 folded dollars from my pocket. I had pinned them there that morning in case the carpenter sent a bill I had not expected. The bill had not come. $2, I said. The whole tent went quiet for a heartbeat, then louder than before. Harlan's cigar nearly fell out of his mouth. Rowan Calloway, he said, because he knew my name and he liked saying it the way his wife had said it the day she died. What on earth are you doing? I'm buying her, I said. She's not a saddle, son. She bites. There wasn't a single hand raised in this tent, I said. My hand is worth $2. Will you take them or not? The auctioneer traded glances with the trader. He would have been a fool to refuse. He nodded. I paid the $2. The trader cut her rope. She stood in the dust looking at me the way a woman looks at a man she does not yet trust but has decided not to run from. I didn't touch her. I handed her a canteen from my belt. She looked at it. She drank from it without raising it to her lips, bending at the waist because she'd been forced into that habit. I had to look away. The townsfolk walked out with their heads shaking. A man whose name I will not write said, "She's a mescalero," as if that were a complete summary. A woman laughed with her hand across her mouth. 2 little girls stared at us as we went past. There was no one who would let a wagon be turned around for us on the road. We walked. 3 miles, the sun on the back of my neck, the canteen in her hands, the rope cut still bleeding at her wrist. I did not bind her again. I did not bind her because my brother-in-law once had a man bound by the wrist in his barn, and the mark on the rope is what started me thinking about what my family had become. My name is Rowan Calloway. My wife Jessamine died 3 years ago. Her share of the ranch I inherited when I married her father. I am not rich, but I'm free, and I'm not lonely the way most people imagine. I'm lonely the way a man with a missing tooth is. Every breath reminds you of something that's gone. We walked home in silence. She moved her jaw twice on the road, like she was remembering how to talk. She had a pack of her own. The trader hadn't taken it. Inside were 3 bone needles, a coil of sinew, a small bundle of dried leaves I didn't recognize, and a folded piece of buckskin with no design on it. She placed the bundle back, every time, the same way, in the same corner. I am not a romantic man, and I will not pretend I saved her. I paid $2 for her because I did not want to be part of what was happening in that tent. That's all. But when she stopped at the edge of the yard of my ranch, and when she looked at the porch and looked at me, And when the only sound on the place was a single crow and the wind toward the foothills, I understood that whatever had just happened was going to cost me more than the $2 in my pocket. It is hard to imagine how many announcements my brother-in-law could muster his outrage into. He came the next morning with his hat in his hand and his voice warm as a griddle. "I want to talk to you, brother," he said. "I have the good of the family in mind." "Brother, you paid $2 for a mescalero woman. I heard. Did you not also hear what the town is saying?" "I didn't." He took a breath as if to deliver a sermon. He had been a man of commerce and then a man of wealth, and he always believed wealth was proof of moral correctness. "They are saying you have become what your wife had almost saved you from being," he said. "They want you to set a bad example. Set it on my own ranch. You have a sister, Rowan. You have 3 men working for you. Now the whole town knows where we are. The contract we signed to bring cattle through their valley, that contract will dry up like a wet rope. They'll find something else to put their spite into." I let him talk. He liked talking. I went to the kitchen and poured coffee. She, I did not yet know her name, sat on the bench outside the kitchen door, watching. Her hands were still. She did not look away. "My name is Rowan," I said. "Rowan," she said. Just the word. No name for herself. "You have a name?" "Nazi," she said. Then Naali. Then, with a longer breath, "Some call me Coz." I had a feeling she'd been named 3 times before and sent away in 2 of those names. I let her be Coz for now. "What did you want of me when you bought me?" "I didn't buy you. You paid $2. They would have let you starve for that." "I gave $2. They are not the same." She did not smile. She picked up the mug I'd set out for her and studied it the way a woman studies a thing she has not been promised yet. "You gave $2 and your brother's hatred. The first is nothing. The second I can feel." A shopkeeper named Ezra Mahan came by the ranch one day. He was a thin man in a brown coat who had been a doctor in St. Louis before he came west. He sat at my table and looked at Coz the way a doctor looks at a person. "Why did you pay $2 for her?" he asked me. "Because nobody else did," I said. "Some men pay for what they can use. You don't want to use her. That's not a question for her to answer. It's also not a question for you to answer for her." "Coz," I said, because I wanted her to have the choice. "Why did you come home with him?" She did not look down. She looked at Ezra across the table, the way she had looked at every bidder at the auction. She answered him slowly, the way you answer when you have not been asked a real question in a long time and you want the answer to be the right one. "He didn't laugh when he paid for me. He cried. There's a difference." Ezra wrote nothing down. He looked at his coffee. "Now, friends, before we go further into this story, I'd like to ask you something honest. What would you have done in her place that day at the auction, when the whole tent was laughing and your hand was the only one in the air? Would you have trusted the man with the $2? Tell us in the comments. We'd like to hear what you'd have done. Ruth came down the hill from her cabin at the back of the ranch. She was my older sister. She had refused Harlan's offer of land for a husband and stayed with me when Jessamine died. She had the authority of a bishop and the eye of a horse trader. She came in with her arms folded. "Rowan, Ruth. She has the back porch full of kindling before you could swing an axe." "That's right. I saw what was in her pack." "That's her pack, not mine." "I haven't said it wasn't." We didn't speak about it for a while. Ruth left her alone with the dogs, who liked her. I left her alone with the kitchen until she sat in the kitchen, the way a person sits when a place has decided they live there. She stayed 3 weeks without speaking more than 7 words in a day. She made herself useful. She learned the names of the horses, the names of the cattle, the names of the grasses, the places where the ground had water under it. She found a place toward the back of the property where the aspen trees bent low. She sat there. Not a single one of my ranch hands would look at her. A cowboy I trusted wouldn't stay in the bunkhouse with her in it. One of them left for a lower-paying job at the Hammond place and never said why to my face. When the wind came down from the hills and the cattle moved out onto the spring grass, we rode together, and I noticed she had a habit. When a horse was scared, she'd lift her hand above his crest and stop her own motion. She never spoke to the horse. She just lifted her hand and waited. The horse would stand still. I had never seen anything like that. I had watched cowboys crack whips and shout and tie ropes into 1,000 knots trying to do what she did with one lifted hand. Ruth came back in one morning with a face half lit. "That woman went down on her knees last night and pressed her ear to the dirt beside the cottonwood," she said. "For 10 minutes, she didn't move. When I came down from the porch, she was laughing. Laughing. she said. There's water under this ground, brother. There's a whole creek of it. Is there? Ezra walked the ditch at dawn with a plumb line. She's right. There's a creek. There's been a creek in that corner of the ranch since before we built the paddock. Coz was listening from the kitchen door with a stone in her hand she'd carried up from somewhere. My aunt showed me this, she said to Ruth. She was a water woman. She read the dirt the way your brother reads a ledger. How did she learn? She read it when there was nothing else to drink. We didn't have wells in the camps. We read the ground. Ruth gave me a look. I had not seen that look on my sister's face in 20 years. A fire crept into Harlan's face when he heard about the spring. He had spent 2 years putting together a writ to acquire the back 80 of my land under territorial water law. Now the back 80 had a creek in it which the writ could not touch. He came down the hill the next week with 2 men I had not seen before. He was pleasant, the way a rattlesnake is pleasant when it has found a place on a warm rock. Congratulations on the spring, he said. Thank you, Harlan. I wonder if you'd consider letting me buy your cattle contract at the same rate as the bank. We'd be partners in the New Valley trade. I don't want a partner. A rancher without a partner is a rancher with a future in a casket. We both know what happened to the Greggs. The Greggs had a different problem. They didn't have a water woman. Harlan's face went the color of a bruise. He left. I want to take a breath with you here for a moment, friends. If this story is moving you, if your eyes are feeling wet, or if you're clenching your jaw the way I'm clenching mine telling it, you are exactly who I am writing for. A like and a subscribe tells us to keep going. We know who we are writing for. Now we'll keep going. That night, the wind changed direction. A ranch hand came in with a face like a storm warning. He had been to town. He had seen a man he knew. There's sickness at the Hammond place, he said. 3 in 1 family down. Water's gone funny in their well. That's not my trouble. It's going to be. There's talk of poison in the wells. Not sickness. Whoever could profit from forcing the small ranchers to sell. A silence fell over the kitchen. The sickness came on like a horse falling in a race. It started in town, in 5 places, in 12 hours. We rode down, and I saw it. The Hammond children on the porch with their mother's head dipped in a bucket. The Bowers down with vomiting blood. The preacher in his vest turning the wrong shade of pale. Ezra Mahan moved among the kitchens with the calm of a man who had been at war with death once before. He called it cholera. He was wrong. Coz walked down before anyone could stop her. She went into the Bower kitchen and bent at the well in the yard. She held a cup of the water up to the sun. She tasted a finger of it on the back of her hand and turned to Ezra. This ain't the sickness of yellow bellies, she said, in the first time she had slipped into full English in front of him. This is bitter root and scrap iron. Whoever put it in knew where the wells are and which families have no time to boil it. How do you know that? The traders carried it down here from the southern campaigns as a powder to mix in paint for shell casings. I have seen it as a girl. My aunt gave it to me to learn, so I would not eat it. Ezra called for 3 of the men from town. The first well they tested had the same taste. So did the second. So did the third. So did the fourth. The 5th was Harlan's well. The 5th was clean. Who'd do such a thing? A man said. I didn't answer. I knew. By the time the town's small ranchers had gathered in the church that night, they knew too. There was a list in every pocket. The list had 20-some families who had sold their water rights in the past 2 years. The list made it all the way down to the bankers. The list made it all the way down to Harlan Bexley. Harlan came in with 2 men of his own. He had a stick. He seemed almost cheerful. It's a sickness of the wells, is it? He said. I'm sorry for the sick. He's sorry, somebody whispered. Now, this is the moment the story was built for. Tragedy of war, Harlan said again. He seemed almost cheerful. Coz stepped out of the back of the church with a tin pail she had filled at our spring, the one she had found, the one Harlan had tried to steal. She poured a cup from the pail. She poured a cup from the dipper of the Hammond well. She held up both. The Hammond well water was the color of a bruise. Brother, she said, addressing Harlan for the first time and using the word our family had always used for him. Brother, would you drink from yours? The room went still. Harlan's 2 men took a step toward her. Ma'am, he said, I will thank you to step back. Drink from the dipper, she said. Ezra wrote her down. He wrote down the date. He wrote down the source. He wrote down the doctor's declaration that the wells had been poisoned with intent. He wrote down the men who had carried the powder in from the south and been paid for it. Harlan swung his stick. The stick broke across the back of the bench in front of him, not me. He had not meant to swing at anyone. He was a man who could not believe he had been caught by a woman whose name he had not bothered to learn. A gun went off in the back of the church. I had the gun. I asked Ruth later if she had given me the gun. She said she had set the gun on the table, and I had taken it up myself. Harlan stood in the middle of the church with his hands opened, his face twisted. He was a rich man whose money had just been put on a table for everyone to see. When the deputy came with the chains, I noticed Coase had stepped back into the shadow of the doorway. Her hands were shaking. The candle on the table had nearly gone out. When the deputy came out with the chains, and the men of the town followed him like a slow procession, she was already at the edge of the porch outside. "Come," she said to me. "I have to show you where we go." "Where?" "There is water in the hills. There has been water there since before your kind came to this valley. They never used it because it didn't sit in a vein they could own. It just made its own way." The night was cold and calm and full of moon. Coase walked me up the canyon behind my ranch with a kind of step I had never seen from a woman in this country. She did not hurry. She knew exactly where her feet were going to land. "This is the spring," she said, when we came around the bend. "Our grandmothers drank from it. The traders never found it because it does not run on top of the ground. It runs sideways, the way water does when there is no other place for it to run." I followed her. The moon put a stripe across her scar. She did not talk much. She talked about her aunt. "My aunt walked that side of the canyon," she said. "She drank from that water. She had to drink because she was hiding." "Hiding from what?" "From my uncle. He had a temper." She didn't explain. Her voice had a kind of stuck sound to it. There was a story there, but the story was not hers to finish tonight. We sat on the side of the rock, and she drank from the spring, and I drank from the spring, and the water tasted like nothing I had ever had. "Rowan." "Yes." "You walked into that tent." "Yes." "And every man laughed at you." "Yes." "And when I walked up to your horse, you did not tie my hands." "I didn't." "You don't know what that meant to me." "I know some of it. You don't know most of it." She stopped and looked at the moon. The moon had been the only cool thing in the world. "There was a man once," she said. "He had a face like my uncle, but he wasn't my uncle. He had the cuffs of the trader. He took me and my cousin and put us in a pen for 14 days in the cold. He told me I was bought. He called my cousin by her tribal name. He did not give me a name. He used me until I was small." She did not cry. She was quiet. The story didn't have anywhere to land. "Did he send you to the auction?" "He died before." "How did he die?" "His money ran out first." "The manner of it doesn't matter. Most of it doesn't. I will give you the rest when I am ready." "That is how long you have." "There is no clock on that. Only the condition." She took out the folded buckskin. She smoothed it onto a rock. The piece had been a corner of her wedding dress. The trader hadn't known. She had kept it. She had kept it for 9 years. "I was not always alone," she said. "I had a husband. The traders gave him what they gave my uncle. I have been in many places where a woman is bought. I have been counted as a tub of butter." She didn't continue. I let her have the quiet. "There's a thing I want to say," I said, when the quiet had gone long enough to be healed. "I am a man who walked 3 days on cursed ground because I did not want to be part of what was happening in that tent. I didn't know then that it would lead me to a woman who could read water the way my mother read a letter. I'm not a good man." "Yes, you are." "I'm not." "Yes, you are. You are the first man who did not laugh at me when you handed me your canteen." "What's that kind of man called?" "We don't have a word for it. We just know one when one shows up." She did not know she had said the whole truth of the matter. That is the kind of line that comes out of a woman who has had a lot of silence in her life and is finally using it. She reached across the rock. Her hand closed the folded buckskin and put it back in her pack. "I spent years being told I was bought. You made me feel I was found. Same word, different weight." I did not answer right away. There was nothing to add. The rock was cool. The water was patient. The crow in the cottonwood had gone quiet. "I'm going to marry you, Coase," I said. "Not tomorrow," she said. "When you can. There's no rush on that anymore." We did not sleep that night. We slept on the porch under a single blanket. The dogs knew us by morning. The crow knew us by morning. The rain had stopped. The smell of creek water came up from the canyon. The story of what came next is the part the people who laughed at the auction would not believe. The bank collapsed. The cattle prices in our valley rose because the small ranchers had clean water and the larger ones had the disease on their hands and in their wells. Harlan sat in a cell without bail because Ezra's evidence was good and the men who had done the poisoning in his pay told the truth on the 3rd day of the trial. 3 of them, all together, as if they had been waiting for permission from each other. The valley now had a town. The town had a doctor. The doctor was Ezra. He was looking for a schoolhouse for the children who came down from the cattle hills. The schoolhouse was Ko's proposal. She said the children in this valley could read sooner if they didn't have to ride to town. Ruth and I stood outside for the wedding in the early afternoon. Ezra read from a book. There were cattlemen. There was one mescalero man I had walked into town myself to invite. He had come up from the southern reservation. He wore clean clothes and shook my hand and told me in 3 languages he had expected this. The wedding was simple. It was the kind of wedding you have when you have just been through a storm and you don't need to plan anything fancier. There was bread. There was bean stew. There was wild turkey from the hills. We poured a cup of the spring water into the soil at the end of the wedding, and Coase poured a cup from the well at the Hammond place clean again, now into the soil at the same time, because she said the 2 waters had to be married before the bride and the groom could be. Harlan took 6 years in the Yuma prison. The men who had carried the powder for him each took 2. The traders who had run the auction lost their license and their best horses. Everything Harlan had used to break us was broken in turn. A little while later, a girl was born in the cabin that had been the same cabin I had built for Jessamine. We named the little girl Jessamine, after my first wife, who had the same laugh Coase sometimes had when she thought I wasn't listening. 7 years after the auction, in the first week of June, Jessamine was 4. Coase walked me down the canyon in the early morning, and she showed our daughter how to listen to the water in the rocks. She put my daughter's ear to the rock and held it there. "Hear the water?" she said, almost to herself. The water is always moving. Even when you hear nothing, you can hear that it is moving. It is patient that way. My daughter pressed her ear again. She had her mother's scar, the kind of scar that makes a face worth looking at twice, and her eyes were already the kind of eyes that would not laugh when a stranger was being bought in the middle of a tent somewhere. They were quiet eyes. They were her mother's eyes. Coase turned the corner of her mouth up in a smile I had not seen from her in a long time. It was the kind of smile a woman has when she has been given $2 for her life and has built an entire town on what came after. My daughter's hand closed over Coase's finger. The dog went down at her feet in the long grass. The crow lifted from the cottonwood and went south over the canyon where the rock held the water the way only certain rocks do, patient as anything that has been asked to last. And the rock in the canyon went on holding the water the way it had always held it, and the water went on being patient. And the small girl who had heard it once never forgot it, no matter how loud the rest of the world got. The spring kept its name. The valley kept its spring. The little girl grew up to be the kind of woman who, when she hears a story like this one, leans her head against the kitchen table and lets the tears come, because she knows her mother carried the water that saved them. We love knowing that you're listening tonight. Next, we'll tell the story of a one-handed widow who was sent back to her dead husband's family and thrown out into a blizzard for the crime of surviving him, and the boy who walked out into the storm because he could not stand the thought of her dying alone. We'll see you there.